Hi, Deborah. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jeremy?
Doing well, thanks. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. I'm going to throw a weird question in the mix. Why is it 2025 and we're still fiddling with like Bluetooth settings and turning on and off devices and microphones? Like, isn't it supposed to all work by now?
You'd think there'd be an AI for that.
Yeah, like I think we're reaching the point where I almost need like an AI chatbot to tell me how to get my computer working. And I've been using computers for a long time. Let's dive on into it. Now, we're fairly recently acquainted, but you've had a phenomenal career. And it turns out, as we've discovered, I have been sort of using content you've created or been a part of the creation over many years of your career. So what I'd love to do is see where that all got started. So tell us, where did you go to school? What did you study? And what was the first thing you came out to go and do?
So I went to Northwestern University, Evanston, Illinois. Go Wildcats. So I was in a 5-year double degree program because at the time I was a musician. I played the oboe, but I also knew that I eventually wanted to be a journalist. But I didn't want to major in journalism. I wanted to have a liberal arts education. So I studied music, oboe performance, and English literature in 5 years. And once I finished up, I did my final senior recital as an oboe player. And I said, you know what? I had a lot of fun, but journalism it is. So my first job was at Advertising Age magazine, which was part of Crane Communications in Chicago. And Ad Age, as it's known now, hired me to be a copy editor and a production assistant. So I started from the ground up in journalism.
Amazing. I am curious for a half moment, though. How many professional oboists, is that the term? Are you an
That is a
oboist?
correct term.
How big is that market, actually?
Not as big as you might think. Basically, I was a decent oboe player, but I was looking at a career in community or small city orchestras and teaching oboe for a living. And not to knock my wonderful oboe teacher in high school, who was amazing and who put me on this path, but I think I wanted to spend more of my time thinking and writing and doing things like that. Although music is still very much a part of my life. I don't play the oboe anymore, but I definitely still love going to orchestra concerts and listening to classical music. It's a big passion of mine.
Sure. I don't think that's a knock. I think some people, to me, if you end up being something like a music teacher, you probably have like that deep love of both music and the teaching, right? And it seems like you had the love for like playing, but really you had other aspirations as well. So I don't think that's a knock. I think there's so many people where they find like I just want to do this little thing because I love every aspect of it.
Yeah.
But let's go on to you now. So you're in Chicago, you're working for, again, this was called Advertising Age. And did you just hit the ground running as a creating content? Like what was the first little bit of that like?
No, I was not creating any content whatsoever. I was editing other people's content. I had done a little bit of proofreading and copy editing when I was in college and kind of fell in love with it. It kind of fits my personality, to be honest, for better or for worse. I tend to find the flaws in things and figure out how to correct them. And so that really made me a very passionate copy editor. So, no, my first job was calling up reporters who were much older than me, telling them what needed to be fixed about their articles, which some of them took okay from a 22-year-old and some of them didn't. So I learned a lot about tact and about being expressing my point of view in a way that didn't make them feel bad, but still got my point across, which was, hey, we needed to make this change. Sorry. And then the other side was in production. And so this was, back in the day where you literally cut and pasted, the term cut and paste, right? So
You
we
were there
literally
with cutting.
cut with an X-Acto knife and pasted it if we had to move copy around. So that was kind of an artistic part of the job, I guess you would say.
That's amazing. Did you find it? I mean, you were working with people older than you, more seasoned than you. You had, I remember that feeling where you got like your shiny degree. Did you find it like, was it a bit of an uphill battle to get them to listen, or did they get, well, this is the job of the copy editor, so I've got to pay attention here?
I think, well, most of the copy editors were older than me, and so they had a lot of respect, and they knew what the copy editor's job was. But I mean, you think about it, a 22-year-old calling you up and saying, "Hey, we need to fix this," or you need to rewrite half your article. Sometimes they didn't take it well, but overall, I mean, I think a good growing experience as someone fresh out of school. Again, learning how to be an adult really quickly and work with other adults. You can't trade that for anything.
No, I think you said that very well. I think that's an amazing attitude and way to learn. Like I've been talking about this with some of the other people on my podcast, and we've noticed like there's a lot of people who get out into the workforce with their college degrees, but whether it's because of a lot of remote first work or other things, we're just noticing that they don't seem to be getting those opportunities like you had to, as you said, sort of adults, right? Sort of go from student learning a thing into doing that thing.
Mhm.
As you work with younger people in the workforce these days, are you seeing similar patterns, or what are you observing?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I think so many young people now, I mean, they've had a kind of a double whammy of going to high school or college during the pandemic,
Right.
which created this environment where, you were at home, you had to suddenly manage or try to manage your own education, your own schooling, everything for yourself because you were just stuck in a apartment or your house or wherever it was that you're trying to learn from. So you picked up a lot of skills. For example, being on Zoom calls. So you picked up a lot of skills in that area. But by the same token, I think set people back in terms of interaction and personal interaction. So fast forward to now with, back to work and workplace, it's harder sometimes, I think, for young people to figure out how to work in a workplace. But at the
Right.
same time, as you alluded to, some of these jobs are being taken by AI. And so that entry level work of coming in and learning the ropes and learning how to be, like I mentioned, like an adult in the workplace, that's harder to do because that job may not exist anymore.
Right.
So I,
Right.
I really do feel for young people. And I have two daughters who are just starting out. And I think it's definitely been a journey for them to figure out how to navigate from the pandemic isolation to working in an office to realizing that maybe aspects of their job or maybe their entire job might not be what it was even a couple of years ago because of AI.
Totally true. I mean, I think it's such an interesting time to be coming out of school, right? I have my oldest is going into college this in through a few weeks, and has already started alluded to like, what's it going to be like when I come out of this place, right? And I have to look her in the eye and be like, nah, I'm not quite sure. It's
Yeah.
going to be a little different than today, probably more like the same than we think it might be, but also in some ways, like some things will have happened that will just blow everybody's minds along the
Yeah,
way.
it's crazy. I mean, I just read a whole article. I think it was the New York Times just not too long ago about how computer science graduates a couple years ago, everybody was told go into computer science. You'll make $100,000 guaranteed as soon as you get out of college. And a lot of these computer science graduates are now struggling to find jobs because
Wow.
AI has taken over so much of what they learned. And so
Wow.
they're having to relearn and maybe go back to school and figure out how to incorporate AI into what they've just spent 4 years learning. It's crazy and it's unfortunate.
That's so true. I used to actually say, well, if my kids don't have anything more like that they develop a passion for, I hope they go get CS degrees for exactly that purpose.
Mhm.
All right, well, let's go back to advertising age now. So, how long did you stay there? And what I'd love to hear is when you eventually did transition out, where were you career wise from the perspective of did you fall in love with copy editing professionally? Like what happened for you in that part of your journey?
So I was ambitious. I knew that I wanted to write, I wanted to be an editor. I didn't know quite what the path was going to be for me, but it ended up being that the path was sort of created for me. And this is kind of a theme that has been with me throughout my career journey, which is being in the right place at the right time, but also just raising my hand at the right moment. So
That I want to hear more about. Can you double click right into that for us?
yeah, so I was copy editing and production assistant for a couple of years at Ad Age, and the managing editor got this really interesting idea that she should create a section of the magazine to focus on interactive marketing. And
Okay.
I didn't know what that was. I didn't really understand anything about interactive, but I thought, this sounds interesting. So she asked me to help her and become an associate editor and help her work on this section of the magazine. And, back then it was writing about infomercials and interactive TV and things like Prodigy. And I was just fascinated by this. I just thought, you know what, this is kind of cool. This is I'm learning about advertising, but I'm learning about a new way of doing advertising. And it was something that I think just kind of sparked in me, like, oh, wow, we're onto something here. And so that was my introduction into what we now call digital marketing and digital media, was just being in that space, being in the place of being ready to move up and having a managing editor who was trusting enough in me to say, hey, come help me work on this, write a few articles, help me plan and strategize this. And I said, okay, that sounds fun.
And where did that go? Was it a big success for the magazine? Was it a big success for you? What happened with that interactive marketing content?
It was an incredible success. I mean, we were one of the first publications to regularly cover what, again, we were calling interactive marketing back in the day. And it was revolutionary, as you know. I mean, it was the dawn of new things. I mean, we wrote about some of the first internet ads for the first online publications. One of my reporters used to be able to call up the founders of Yahoo anytime he wanted to, and just ask them, like, "Hey, Jerry, Jerry Yang. Hey, Jerry,
Yeah.
what's going on at Yahoo?" And I don't think we realized, at the same time we realized that it was a big and exciting part of the industry. I don't think we also really realized just how transformative it was. But we all were kind of passionate by that. And what happened for me is that over time, our managing editor, she transitioned into a different role. And then eventually I became editor of this small section of the magazine, on the interactive media and marketing section. And so that allowed me then to take the reins and say, hey, okay, this is what we want to cover. These are the kinds of stories that the ad industry needs to hear. And these are the kinds of companies that are creating new opportunities for new types of advertising, new media, new types of measuring, what advertising it looks like. And we just were able to break ground every single week because new things were happening as the internet was being born. And we just wanted to be there and help the ad industry find its way.
That's amazing. I mean, it's funny for those of like yourself and myself, where we were at those early days of building what we'll call the consumer internet, consumer web, and how hard it is to convey, I think, to others that there was no prior art, right? You weren't following some template or blueprint on how do we write about marketing on the internet, right? You guys were basically inventing it as you went.
Very much so. Just like everybody else was at the time.
So it sounds like you were also having a lot of passion for what you were doing. Was this filling you with any sense of where you wanted to take your career longer term? Were you looking well down the tracks, or just kind of at what was happening at the feet in front of you?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that this was starting to become a passion for me. And, I think it ties back into being an English major and wanting to spend a lot of time studying and thinking about something and coming up with a new viewpoint. And there were so many opportunities, again, because this was all new. We weren't writing about, the TV business or the magazine business, which had been around for decades and decades. It was, like I mentioned, just being created at each week with each new press release, with each new development, with each new company that came about back in those days. So that was the excitement, was, okay, we can start to track bit by bit what's happening and what's changing about advertising, about marketing. And then look, eventually, kind of look back and go, wow, that was really transformative in the moment.
Yeah.
We kind of had a little inkling of how transformative it was, but not really as much as I do now, kind of looking back going, yes, I mean, being able to say, I wrote, which I did, a cover story for Ad Age about how Procter & Gamble decided that it didn't want to pay for internet advertising based on who saw the ads, but based on who clicked on the ads, which was monumental because this was the creation of cost per click advertising. which has
Wow.
become this huge business over time,
Sure.
right? But we wrote that article and we covered that and we said, okay, yeah, we were there. Oh, Procter and Gamble was there, but we covered it. And it's an idea of just how momentous some things were that we ended up covering.
Yeah, I almost picture a young Debra out there in the AI world. Probably someone. Actually, I interact these days with someone who does the AI beat for Ad Age Magazine or adage.com today. And I think for her, it's probably the similar kind of like, this is a whole new playground, right? No one's thought about what advertising in the world of AI looked like 5 years ago, let alone before that. So you're on this you're literally like paving the way for so many things. What happened next?
What happened next was my husband finished business school at Northwestern, and he decided, we actually mutually decided that we would move to the Bay Area. And he took a job in the Bay Area. I got in touch with someone who I'd interacted with in journalism circles, someone named John Battelle, who worked at Wired magazine. And
I
said,
actually know John Battelle as well. That's so crazy.
John is amazing. John is one of my mentors and one of my idols and really transformative to my career. So
amazing.
I'd known John at Wired, and I reached out to him and I said, hey, I'm moving to San Francisco. Do you have any jobs? Because he was an editor at Wired magazine at the time. I said, do you have any jobs available? I'd love to come work for you. And
this is, Debra, this is roughly what year? Is it still late 90s or into the 2000s?
1997.
97, okay.
Yes. So this was not, yeah. So I edited the interactive section of Ad Age for about 4 years. I was with it for about 4 years. I didn't edit it for the entire 4. But then in 1997, we made the personal move to move out west to San Francisco. And John, to pick up the story, John didn't have a job at Wired, as it turned out, which was kind of disappointing because I thought, shoot, I would love to work at Wired magazine. Who wouldn't back in those
especially
early
then.
days.
Yeah.
But what he said actually was more interesting. He said, well, actually, I'm leaving Wired and I'm starting up a different publication, and it's going to be the news magazine of the internet economy. And I was like, that sounds cool. So I said, yes, I'd love to help you with that. And he hired me on a freelance basis to help him and a couple other people write the business plan for what became a magazine called The Industry Standard, which was, for a brief shining moment, the news magazine of the internet economy and one of the most successful magazines of the late 90s, covering the dot-com boom.
Absolutely. He pulled that off at that time for darn sure. So you were in there at like the first breaking ground kind of stage.
I was there. I helped write the business plan. One of the tasks he gave me and the others that we there was a small group of us, about 4 of us, who were working on the business plan together. He said, we need to size the internet economy. And I was thinking to myself, what does that mean? And remember, this is like 1997. This is before the internet was really like very widely available. Google, being able to search for things. You couldn't do that. So we were just by hand and reporting and digging through documents, trying to size, well, there's the advertising part of the internet economy. And then there's the nuts and bolts, the infrastructure part. And then there's the software that sits on top of it. And then there's the pipes, the plumbing. I mean, so we had to try to, in our mind, come up with how big was this internet economy, because that was part of his pitch to IDG, which was the company that was backing the magazine. His pitch was, this economy is going to be enormous. So we had to prove that to get the funding to launch the magazine. And then we had to say, okay, now we think that there's demand for a weekly publication about this. And kudos again to John for having the vision that a couple years later, this is 1997, we launched the magazine in 97. By 98, 99, the dot-com boom was in full force, and our magazine ended up being the center of every single thing that was happening in that time frame.
And so how long did you stay with Industry Standard?
So I stayed there about a year full-time.
Okay.
Another personal move led to that change. So I was there for the first part of the magazine, for founding the magazine. I was the first executive editor of the magazine and helped to hire the staff, led a whole bunch of the publication, managed a lot of editors, but then I made a personal decision to move up to Seattle. And so I
Ah,
became like a contributing editor to the publication after that. But still very much a big part of my life, and something that I look back on as really transformative, because for those in the audience who don't know the end story of the industry standard, we were a rocket ship, or a roller coaster, maybe is a better way to describe it, because we
a little of both, a little like a rocket ship that actually turned out to have a roller coaster attached or
yeah,
something.
yeah, up and down, and way down. But no, I'm getting ahead of myself. So what ended up happening was we were the #1 magazine in ad pages in, I think it was the year 2000. I believe that's correct. I should know this for sure, but I think it was the year 2000, which means that our magazines had sold more advertising than back in the day, like the bridal magazines. I mean, our magazines were
Wow.
literally like 300 pages thick every week. And then everything went bust. So this was the .com bust that happened in 2001, and our magazine went bankrupt. We had expanded too much. It had a lot of real estate commitments that were made at the magazine, and the industry standard, like many, many companies in the .com boom, had a great run for a couple of years, and then unfortunately went out of business. It's
Yeah,
very, it teaches you a lot of lessons about being in the right place at the right time, and understanding, having foresight to ride the wave. I'm using a lot of metaphors to ride the wave, rocket, but pick your metaphor, to be in the right place at the right time, to ride the wave, but then also to know when that wave is cresting, and to be able to say, aha, okay, maybe, maybe the tide, here's another metaphor, the tide is starting to turn. Change.
first of all, I like metaphors so much that when I was at CBS, by the way, I like them and I misuse them all the time. When I was at CBS, my parting gift from my team was actually a book on, I was the idiot's guide to metaphors. So I love it, and I'm with it all the way.
Except for that, when I tend to mix them in weird ways, and suddenly my stories become really convoluted, like the rocket ship that takes a roller coaster ride in the waves. So
But
there you
I'll
go.
take it. I'll take it. And I think it's something interesting that I don't think I really thought about. So I was in a .com during that time. We were, I'm not going to say we were more grounded or anything. It's just our area of focus. This was my startup was called Mediabolic, was around connected devices. So we never actually did the raise, $100 million on some spec thing. Like, we never accidentally, fortuitously, or unfortuitously got caught up in that loop. So we sort of made it through that path. But watching the fallout, not just of the .coms, but as you say, like publications, all of the support industries around it were so massively impacted, right? It was, I think it's hard still to describe, because the economy as a whole was doing fine, right? It was just our little world that was just coming to this weird little kind of end.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, you have to remember too, like some incredibly successful companies came out of that time frame. Google,
Absolutely.
Amazon,
Yeah.
eBay. I mean, LinkedIn. Companies like this just have really found ways to dominate and to become successful. Even though many, many, many startups did not have that same fate, it was
True.
truly transformative.
All right, so let's go back to you now. You're in Seattle. You're in the we'll hear the details, but you're going to be moving on from the standard. And did you have established at any point along your career, were you thinking long term? Were you setting a vision for yourself? Or it sounds like you were I was an opportunistic guy. I'm curious how your path was.
I mean, yes, I think it's opportunistic, but also making sure you keep your finger on the pulse of what's next. And so for
Okay.
me, I spent a few years in Seattle as a freelance journalist and researcher. I was starting to realize that, again, what was more interesting to me was not just being the type of journalist who wrote the latest, the news just because press release came out, there was a
Sure.
lot of that. It was really about being somewhere to create a news story or to identify something that was happening that people weren't paying attention to. And that led me to say, maybe I don't need to be a journalist. Maybe what I should try to be is an analyst. And
Okay.
I don't even mean like a financial analyst. I full, background. I have no financial Wall Street MBA training whatsoever. I'm an English and music major, but I wanted to spend time in my mind. An analyst was someone who was able to think deeply about a topic and provide a viewpoint and a measured and interesting viewpoint on something. And so that led me to a relatively new company that I had gotten to know while I was a journalist at Ad Age. And it was a company called eMarketer. And so I reached out to Jeff Ramsey, who is one of the founders of eMarketer, and I said, "Hey, we know each other. We've interacted. If you ever have any jobs or interesting things to do, I would love to be part of your company in some way."
Okay.
And I thought, given my journalism background, he would say, "Okay, well, work on our newsletter or edit some things." But he came back to me, maybe, I don't remember how long, maybe a couple weeks later, maybe a month or two later. And he said, "Well, our demographics analyst just quit, and we need someone to write research about the demographics of online marketing. And who's using different platforms, and what are their demographics, and this was all about gathering like a lot of third-party research, looking, doing interviews, and
Hmm.
just really assembling a lot of data from various places." And I thought, well, that sounds really cool.
I mean,
I'll be a
that was a
demographics analyst now.
yeah, it sounds like serendipity in a bottle right here.
It was. I mean, and here's the other weird thing. And so this was in 2004. I was in Seattle. He was in New York. And
Okay.
he didn't ask me to move to New York. He said, "You were perfectly fine to stay in Seattle as long as you get your work done, as long as you, have a good way to get in touch and stay in touch with the team here in New York City. We're happy to work with you." So this was like, what, 15 years before the pandemic?
I was going to say, this is long before most of us were learning about that mute button.
Yeah. I mean, I learned about video and Zoom conversations and, working with people from home and working with someone who was in an office way before it was cool. And so kudos to them for, again, recognizing that someone didn't have to be in an office to be a successful employee and
It's
be able.
amazing.
Yeah. And so I have to give huge credit to eMarketer for hiring someone like me all the way across the country to work for them and to write research. But hopefully I did a good job. I ended up spending a long time there.
Well, it was is one of those brands that I think if you were actively involved in tech, or maybe even not in tech, but between the years of, I don't know, 2008 and 2018 come to mind. Like, I can't tell you how many times I embedded an eMarketer graph or data chart or something in a pitch deck, in a white paper, wherever I was. It was like the go-to. And when I ran my marketing consultancy for a few years, I mean, it was all about things we could learn from platforms like eMarketer. So yeah, we consumed your content quite a bit.
I'm really glad to hear that. And kudos again to the founders of eMarketer for realizing two things. First of all, that there was a need for somebody or a company that could come in and provide an objective layer on top of all of the conflicting data that you might see out in the marketplace. And so that was one thing, being able to aggregate and filter and organize data from multiple sources and then come up with our own research on top of that made sense of a lot of things that were happening in online marketing back then, and still do. I mean, eMarketer still does very similar things today. Sure. But then the red and black charts. I mean, literally everybody I run into who I say, I used to work at eMarketer, they say, "Oh, those red and black charts, those charts are everywhere. I love the red and black charts." That taught me just, having a strong brand image and something that is recognizable to your brand, whether you're a B2B brand like eMarketer or whether you're, Coca-Cola or whatever it is so important. And so,
Absolutely.
I give them such kudos for having those charts that you independently brought up as we're talking. It's just,
it was very smart because you could find a lot of data, obviously, on the internet at the time, but it created this sort of trusted brand, right? It was almost like a Consumer Reports kind of thing. If you saw an eMarketer chart, you knew it was probably legit, right? I didn't do any of the, I didn't check the research, as they'd say, but also it meant that a certain calibrated thinking around should we even write a report on topic X, Y, or Z has occurred. So I found it was like, as a person who used the content, it gave me a safe place where I knew no one's going to be like, Jeremy, where'd you get this data? Right.
Yep.
So
I'm glad to hear that, because yes, vetting, and we looked at a lot of data that we did not include in our database. So I learned really valuable skills about looking at research and reading research and understanding, okay, is that a good study? Did they use a strong methodology for that study? Or is that not a good study? Is that totally self-serving for whatever brand or company put it out?
yeah, I think that kind of a talent and discerning eye, it's gotten very blurry these days, right? And part of that is AI slop and et cetera. And part of it is everybody's just rushing around so much that without that sort of standardized brand, it's like, well, I'll just take the data, so and so has given me and use it there. And hopefully if it's from ChatGPT, I can actually find the source for it.
Yep.
Right.
It does help a lot in my current work, where I might go to a ChatGPT and look for a simple fact, and I see the sources that it might be relying on, and I go, ooh, I got to check those sources. Or I know from my previous work, these are not really reliable sources, because they're getting data from second or third generation of data. So it's not the original source. Very, very, something to watch for, and something that I learned
for
to watch
sure.
for.
I'm not going to name. I'm not a name names kind of person. When I was doing that startup Mediabolic, I remember there was a point where there was an analyst firm that was talking about the connected home, and we were one of like 3 companies doing what we were doing. It was not a big space. We were really too early, and I remember seeing us in a research report and a market share, and being like, well, what is that? And I actually emailed with the people who put it out, and they basically explained they make these projections, and because of this data point, they think X, and this, they think Y. I'm like, there are 3 of us. I can tell you how many customers we have, and I can tell you how much they have, because we all know, and it's all pretty transparent.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't add up. And they're like, yeah, but this is our methodology. I'm like, I can give you the actual data, and you could put that in your report, and you'd have the real, this is what's happening. And they didn't want it.
Oh my goodness.
So that was I had the opposite lesson from you as to definitely don't believe everything you read coming out of, a accredited white paper or research report. Better learn how they did the research. Right.
Yep.
To get there.
Yeah. I mean, again, asking the questions, and journalism training is so great for that, because, you have to learn how to ask the questions and be persistent, and sometimes go underneath what is being said on the surface to realize what's actually going on. And it's the same with looking at data, or for that matter, looking at what you see in AI. I mean, those skills are all really valuable.
Yeah, let's dive in on that for a second. As someone who has done and put together research and really does have a good understanding of it, right? Not like the rest of us who casually find reports and do stuff, but someone who actually knows what they're doing and has been trained, as you said, to ask questions. I'm curious, do you approach ChatGPT or whatever AI platform you use differently than the rest of us? Like, do you have a more critical, interactive eye on the things you get back?
Definitely always checking the sources. That's probably the most common thing that I will do. Even before sometimes I read what ChatGPT gives me as a response, I will look at what sources it's used to generate that response. And I'm very happy that those sources are available to check. So that's the first thing.
Okay.
But the second thing is, and this is probably a bit counterintuitive to what you're asking, part of what I do now as an analyst on my own is I research consumer behavior and the intersection of consumer behavior, marketing, and AI. And so a lot of times when I'm using a ChatGPT, I am trying to think, well, how would an average consumer approach this question? And they would not be approaching this question with the massive prompts that I see people generating, which I do on occasion, but they would be asking very simple questions. Help me plan a cruise to the Caribbean in December of 2025.
And not necessarily realize that like it'll give you some data back, but whether or not it was based on actual cruise ship data is a whole different question.
I mean, but for me, it's understanding, well, this is what an average consumer might be doing. So I'm going to search that way because I want to see what they see. I don't want to see what like the smart AI user sees. I want to see what an average person sees because I think that's more relevant to marketers, unless the marketer is selling something to the really smart AI user, which there are, right? But I'm thinking about like the average consumer. So, to continue my example of cruises. So someone types in, I want to take a cruise, help me decide which cruise line. Celebrity Cruises wants to reach that person. Celebrity Cruises wants to know, hey, how is that person using what are they? Oh, wow. First of all, they're interested in the Caribbean. Second of all, they're traveling in December. I want to be present when they're looking, and I want to make sure that I provide valid, recognizable, accurate information back to them, that they're not getting, false information or wrong information. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying I'm using AI in a very critical way in terms of what I see when I'm using it for my own purposes, whether it's for writing or researching or gathering information. But then I'm also testing it and as a consumer would, because I'm trying to put my mindset into, okay, this is how more average users of ChatGPT or of Gemini or whatever would say or would do. They wouldn't be using these fancy prompts that a lot of people are.
Right. I by the way, which of the newsletters I get, I love when I see fancy prompts, I'm going to be honest. And I always like to try them out and see what they do, whether they're like behavior analysis things or crazy pattern detection stuff. If you subscribe to any newsletter that has like, here's your cool prompt of the week, I'm a big fan of cut and paste. Not quite the same as you used to, but go straight into it.
Yeah, well, you need that with the prompts these days.
Yeah,
can get monstrous.
So before we started to talk about what you're doing now, but I do want to backtrack for just a half second, if you don't mind. So you spent a while at eMarketer. What was the bulk of your time there?
Yeah, it was my home for a total of 19 years. But
wow.
17 of those years, I led the social media practice. And that I got my start there by paying attention to college students. I was the demographics analyst. I was noticing that college students were researching or were using social media a little bit differently. And I went back to eMarketer and I said, hey, we kind of ought to pay attention to this this is an example of consumer behavior changing. Launched the social media research practice, led it for 17 years, wrote 120 research reports, one of the largest bodies of research about social media marketing that probably exists. And it was amazing. And it really did teach me, yet again, the power of being somewhere at the beginning of a tectonic shift in marketing and consumer behavior.
That's really well said. I'm curious if you could, I'm going to put you on the spot and we'll see how it goes. Do you recall what was the hottest social media platforms when you started and when you ended? Like you must have started in the Bebo, MySpace, Facebook era?
The trifecta. Well, add Friendster. Friendster would be the fourth one.
Friendster, okay.
Yes, though if I were to go back in time, I would have changed the title of the very first report I wrote about social media. The first title was Social Media Marketing, Carving Out Some MySpace. And if I had known that MySpace was not going to be the thing that everybody gravitated toward, I would have probably said something about, pay attention or, look in the mirror, watch face, something about face. I would have made a pun about Facebook. But
go grab a good Facebook.
Yes.
How's that?
Yes, there you go.
Sit down with a nice Facebook. I don't know.
But you know what? I was onto the right thing, the right concept. And it just tells you again, the concept is what you pay attention to. The idea that consumer behavior was changing, people were using social media, young people in particular, marketing needed to change because they needed to figure out how to show up in these platforms and how to show up authentically and how to build advertising into these platforms.
So one more sort of just throwing at you kind of question. Did any of the social media platforms over your 17 years watching them, was there anything that really surprised you along the way?
I mean, so many things. I mean, social media reinvents itself every single year, and it's never the same thing. Over every single year that social media existed, there are new stories, new companies that come about, new ways of advertising, new controversies, many of them surrounding Facebook or Meta. That's what kept it interesting for so many years that I did it. Was you always knew that every year something was, you didn't know what, but something big was going to happen.
Right. So you're working in arguably one of the hottest sectors at a very well reputable establishment. I'm curious, why did you transition to your own firm?
Really, social media has been around for a long time. It's very much a mature business, even though a lot of aspects of it do change every year and it's very volatile. It's very traditional in some ways. You know who the leading companies are, you know how much money is being spent on social advertising. And a lot of the issues and challenges of social media are the same year after year, even if things change sometimes. Right. I had this passion and this realization that AI was going to similarly, and maybe even more so, change consumer behavior the way that social media did. And I realized that there was a trajectory for me to say, okay, I can take what I did with social media, which is to pinpoint the dynamics of consumer engagement, and then help marketers to realize what they needed to do to reach those consumers who were changing some aspect of the way they were communicating. And so I realized that AI was where people were going to start finding more information, and it was going to be impacting the consumer journey, most likely from start to finish. And that told me, okay, this is another monumental moment for marketing and for advertising. And it just like the monumental moments that we've talked about in the rest of this conversation, this is where marketing shifts again. And this is where I can play a role. This is where I can use my research skills, my understanding, and my interest, my curiosity for what's coming around the corner, and say, okay, how do we as marketers reach these consumers in new ways? Because everything is changing. And now, we know that everything is changing, and we're in it right now, and it's happening right before our eyes.
Absolutely. In fact, we will probably have said things on this recording that by the time I publish, something will be slightly out of date based on the current world. By the way, I'm going to take a moment to come out of the context of this podcast and say Debra is being an absolute champ as we are having absurd technical difficulties today. So thank you, Debra, for putting up with what I'll call just the internet and its woes. But we've been dealing with everything from Bluetooth problems to browser issues. It's been fun. We should probably have a drinking game that goes along with this at this stage. So where I want to know is, where did you get the confidence to decide that this time it wasn't about going to someone and saying, I think we should do this, but starting it yourself? That's a hard step.
It was a hard step, but it feels right. It feels right to be working for myself. It feels right to be in charge of what I think I want to do, whatever clients I work with, the type of research that we do, the ideas that we explore together in my research. And then again, just being able to follow my curiosity about the ways that AI is changing consumer behavior and marketing, and help use that to help educate my clients, giving the presentations that I give, participating in the private presentations that I do, to make sure that they stay up to speed. It's really gratifying to be able to say that I'm doing this myself.
Yeah.
It's scary. I won't lie. It's scary to be doing it on my own without the support of having salespeople and marketing people and web developers and finance people and all the people that you normally would have in a larger organization, and knowing that it's all me.
All the people. I think to me, part of that essence of someone who's willing to be an entrepreneur, it's about understanding that you're about to take a step in life where, for possibly the first time, there's no safety net of any kind. right? You can now, granted, you've had enough of a career. If it wasn't working, you need to find a job somewhere. You can go put your name out and go figure it out. But that boldness and that willingness to say, well, I'm just going to see what happens when I don't have all that support around me. Are you thrilled you made that choice at this stage? Where are you on the journey?
Well, I mean, if you've been a solopreneur, you know that there's ups and downs. And, some weeks it's like, am I sure I made the right decision? And other weeks it's, I've got so much inbound work that I don't know what to do with it. And so I think the challenge is, and it's not new. Yeah, I mean, I know that, logically, conceptually, it's not new that you have weeks where you feel like you're on top of the world and other weeks where you feel like, oh man, it's not working. But I think it's the passion. I think it's the passion for knowing that this is something important that needs to be said, needs to be done, needs to be researched, and needs to have a viewpoint brought to it that someone like me with my long history of being at the beginning of internet marketing and following and the trajectory of everything that's come before it. It just feels like a moment that I actually just need, like in my heart and my soul, to be involved in. Doing it for myself just is, I think, gratifying in that I'm building this, and whatever decisions I'm making, maybe they aren't the decisions that other people would make about how they run their business, but they're my decisions. And
they're yours.
I really feel confident about that.
That's wonderful. So, Debra, a question I always like to ask at the end is, how do you define success today?
That is a good question. I think maybe I'll be just a little bit kind of philosophical on this one, because
please,
I think success really has to come from knowing that something you're passionate about is important and being willing to take the risk to follow that passion, and to know that even if on a day or a week it's not something, maybe something didn't go right that day, or maybe it was a frustrating day in some respects, but to know that maybe tomorrow there's going to be something else that happens that helps fuel the passion and takes you in a different direction. So for me, it really is just about being honest with myself and knowing that I'm on the right track, even if there's pitfalls along the way.
I think it's wonderful. I think there's so few people who take a journey like yours, where you start out, you get good at a thing, you get recognized at a thing, you build on that thing, and then at some point, just like roll those dice effectively on yourself. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. Debra, where can people find you on the fabulous internet today?
Well, in social media, I'm primarily on LinkedIn these days. So you can find me at Debra Williamson, all one word, obviously, at LinkedIn. And my business is called Sonata Insights. That harks back to my days as a musician, because sonata is a musical term. Sonatainsights.com is my website. I keep a blog there where I keep track of the latest news. And yeah, you could also find me at conferences and events.
It's perfect. First of all, now I'm going to leave this in to see what happens at the end, because I can cut you at conferences if I have to. Debra, that's such a great journey. It's fun to think that I've probably used some of your content in my career, and I love hearing that you've gone out to do your own thing. I can't wait to see how it progresses, and I hope people go check you out at Sonata Insights. Have a lovely day.